Welcome back to the Christian Century YouTube channel. I'm John, joined today by one of our writers, Tom Steagald, who has written a piece for us recently about his dad's legacy, navigating memories of his dad while looking through his dad's old Bible. We're going to dive into all those themes here today. But first, Tom, thanks for being here. For those out there who don't know you, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, I'd be glad to, John. Glad to be back with you after a couple of years. I'm a retired United Methodist minister, just retired in the last couple of years. I'm one of those folks that's too conservative for the liberals and too liberal for the conservatives. I just don't seem to really fit anywhere exactly. But I do fit in Spartanburg, where I live now, because of my grandchildren. I have two grandchildren down here, and when some health issues forced me into a little earlier retirement than I had hoped to take, I just came down to be with my family, and I'm here and writing and enjoying them, and yeah, life's good. Life's good.
Oh, that's great. Well, some of the people watching this probably have read your article already, and some maybe haven't. Could you give us just a little bit of a summary of your dad, who this article is largely about your dad. Could you tell us a little bit about his ministry that he did?
I sure will. And thank you for asking, John. Dad was a real interesting guy, probably one of the most conflicted individuals I ever met. He had this sense that God really wanted him to go into the ministry and full-time ministry, and he expressed some of that with great vituperation at other churches and ministers. He just didn't approve. Whatever it was, he didn't approve. He was one of those sorts of guys, you know. And so his preaching came out as very fiery, very emotional, very evangelistic, in the sense of wanting to convert souls and that sort of thing. Never very much individual piety, as is characteristic of Southern evangelicalism, you know. Never very much with regard to social justice or taking care of the poor or whatever else. Dad would always sort of translate those terms into personal categories for salvation. I was blind, but now I see. I was lost, but now I was oppressed by sin, but now I'm whatever. Dad had just, you know, he just sort of made that full turn from anything social to all individual. And I think, you know, he grew up, he didn't really know what was going on at the time, but it was the fundamentalist modernist debate that was kind of in the, you know, in the air as he came of age. He didn't study much, but I mean, it was just in the air in churches, you know, and the whole issue of the social gospel versus the personal salvation kind of thing. Those debates were raging, and Dad, largely due to his race and due to the fact that he grew up in Birmingham, excuse me, in Montgomery, and due to his evangelical sort of anyway, the point is he turned really toward that, you know, Billy Sunday, Moody Institute, you know, all that personal, that kind of thing, what we would call New Calvinism, or new Reformed in a way. Anyway, that was his ministry, and unfortunately, he never lasted anywhere very long, because he sort of went in and kind of wanted to bust up the furniture and get everybody back on the, you know, the straight and narrow, and the individual straight and narrow, you know. So don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other thing, and then was surprised when people didn't, you know, didn't really take to that too much. And so they you know, he was at a couple of places, but he was at none of them very long. But anyway, but he died in 1988, and he was never happy that I became a United Methodist. He distrusted everything that wasn't Baptist. He just distrusted in everybody. But when he died, he told my mother that he wanted me to wear my robe to preach his funeral, which I took to be very, very powerful blessing and endorsement.
Wow. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. In this article, what you're doing is taking us through some of the actual pages of his old Bible, which and people can read in the article more about the details of the specific Bible version it is and whatnot. But
Yeah.
and there, yeah, there you have it. I'm curious if you just wanted to maybe highlight a little bit of like what really struck you the most when you were reading through, looking at the different ways he marked up the Bible that he used.
Yeah, certainly, John. And you know, there's almost no way to tease out what I know about Daddy and how what I know about Daddy, you know, leads me to read what he wrote in the Bible in a certain way, whereas somebody else might not have that same sort of, you know, whatever. So it's hard to tease out all that sort of thing. But one of the things that came clear to me very quickly, I was 12. I tell the story just in very brief detail in the article in Century. The night that Dr. King was assassinated, and I happened to be with Daddy the night that Dr. King was assassinated. We were on our way to a basketball banquet of all things for church league basketball. And when the news came on his response, which I don't feel good to share on YouTube, but his response so horrified me. And I was 12 years old. And I knew that there was something so wrong about what he was saying that it considerably altered my image of him. You know, I had seen him kind of as a colossus, as a giant, as whatever. And suddenly somehow he seemed a really small man based on some of this stuff. Well, anyway, that was long years before he died. He died in 1988. And but I began to notice more and more discrepancies kind of between, I mean, he was a weekend preacher and he was a deacon at a Baptist church, and he had certain convictions associated with that, but he broke them all the time. You know, so like anyway, but the point is, I just begin to see these discrepancies, which in point of fact, all of us see in each other and have since the time of Jesus. We see the speck in the neighbor's eyes and we don't see the log in our own eyes. I mean, that whole deal. And so I'm not, I'm not claiming any righteous high ground or anything. I'm just simply saying that I began to notice things that really disturbed me about the difference between the gospel Jesus was preaching and the kind of what I was seeing other days of the week and that sort of thing. And I don't mean that to be a cliche. I'm just simply saying I was seeing that discrepancy. And I began to try to pay particular attention to my own discrepancies and realize that there were more than I could, more than the sands of the sea, or whatever. But that whole issue. And then some months ago, I'm working on a new book, and I'm always working on something. Anyway, and I ran across something that made me think about Daddy's Bible. So I went and I got it off the shelf, just got it, and I started looking through it. And there's a bulletin from the Bradley's Creek Baptist Church, which I talk about in there, and then here's the inscription on the front. If you can see that beautiful handwriting, you may or may not, and you see where the cover is torn. And I spend a little time reflecting on that too. Anyway, so just as an occasional exercise, I'm not obsessed with it or anything like that. Just every once in a while, I'll just pull the book down and just go through and look and see what he underlined and try to imagine why he did. Why was that important to him at that moment? And then also inevitably you begin to see things that aren't there, things that aren't underlined. Why not this? Why not this? And it's all speculation. It's all speculation. And I hope that it's done as an act of blessing. Dad and I, like a lot of fathers and sons, and like a lot of minister fathers and minister sons, we just had a tough time. We just had a tough time. So looking at what he had underlined, understanding at least a little bit about why he might have. My dad had a very individualistic ethic, a very prohibitive ethic, that what it meant to be a Christian was you don't do certain things, most of which he did through the years, which created a kind of self-loathing and here we go, which is part of what made him preach grace for everybody except for himself, that kind of thing. Very much a cliche in those kind of ways. But in looking at what he did underline, you can't help but notice what he didn't, and why that would be the case. And I was particularly interested in issues of social justice, because Dad preached Galatians 3 that in Christ there's no this or that, but he didn't believe that. I mean, he preached it, but he didn't believe it. It was just not written on his heart. And anyway, so just trying to read what's written, what's written and what's unwritten, and try to draw some distinctions out of that. It's really been kind of a fun exercise, but it's also, if I may, it also has taken me one more step, which is to wonder what would happen after I die if my kids looked at my Bibles, and paid attention to what I had underlined or marked or written a little note, and what I hadn't. And I'm fair game. I'm fair game for that same kind of examination, and just wondering what they would think about me. I would hope that they would know that some of what I underlined was aspirations. This is who I hope to be, not who I am yet. And I hope that, as I say at the very end of the article, I hope they let me off the hook. If I'm trying to let Dad off the hook, let them let me off the hook too.
Wow. Well, I'm sure we could talk forever, but I think this has been really helpful for our listeners and our readers. And I think this article has kind of inspired me too. My grandfather was a Methodist minister, and I didn't inherit all of his ministry materials when he died a while back, but I do have an old Bible of his. I have an old prayer book, and I've looked through them a bit, but I have not really taken a deep dive. So I think now maybe this is the right time for me to take a closer read.
I hope you'll do that. But if you wind up finding that you have any of his old sermons, I would say maybe don't read them. I have a little stack of Dad's sermons, and they're just it was, yeah, maybe I hope your grandfather was more eloquent and more engaged in a wider tradition than my dad was.
He didn't write out his sermons usually. He just wrote little notes on a piece of paper. It was more of extemporaneous style. He was a Methodist, I think I mentioned, but yeah, our joke was he would cry in every sermon. He was just that kind of preacher. He
Oh
he would feel
yeah,
the emotions.
yeah,
But
really deep hurts in religion, as the Moravians and Wesley would call it. Religion of the heart.
yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks so much, Tom. Everyone out there who's interested, if you haven't gotten a chance to read this article yet, we will have the link to this article in the video description below, along with some other links. We'll have the links to the list of all the articles Tom has written for the Christian Century, in addition to Tom's Substack, which you can go check out. It's called "I Saved You a Place at the Table." Thanks so much, Tom. Great to chat with you today.
Good to talk to you too, John. God bless you in your work.